In this episode, on a remote island on the Minnesota-Canada border, the relentless barking of two dogs draws their owner out of the cabin and into the woods, until Cathy rounds the corner of the cabin and comes face to face with the family of black bears. Her two dogs frantically run back indoors to Cathy's elderly parents, but Cathy doesn't follow them. As the clock ticks by, she is nowhere to be seen. Hit like and subscribe. This is Fierce. 10 miles northeast of Minnesota's International Falls lies Red Pine Island. The small, isolated island is situated on Rainy Lake, which intersects the Canadian-Minnesota border. The freshwater lake covers an area of 360 square miles and is fringed by pine trees and forests. It's a popular fishing and camping destination with small campsites dotted around its perimeter. The Sweatt-Mueller family owned a cabin on Red Pine Island, one of several thousand islands on the lake. It was the only building on the island, and they had visited it for decades. Each summer, they would head to the idyllic spot and spend weeks there, soaking in the surrounding nature. Their daughter, Catherine Sweatt-Mueller, was an outdoorswoman. She lived on her family farm with her husband Phil in Minnesota. She enjoyed spending time with her horses, and she enjoyed the outdoors just as much as her parents did. On the 1st of September 2019, 62-year-old Catherine, known as Cathy to her friends and family, was visiting her elderly parents at the cabin. As the sun was setting in the sky, she let her two dogs outside before locking up the cabin for the night. Not long after doing so, she heard the dogs barking outside. At first, this wasn't unusual. They may have spotted a squirrel or something and chased it up a tree. But when their barks persisted, Cathy decided to investigate. They must have found something, she thought. So she opened the door and called them, but they didn't come. Instead, they continued to bark. Someone or something must be out there. One of her dogs, called Birdie, was a therapy dog. Catherine was a passionate dog lover and would visit assisted living facilities with Birdie. Her visits would brighten the lives of the elderly who lived there. They would bring a smile to the residents' faces as the dog would sit there calmly as she was stroked and petted. Birdie was a calm and sensible dog. Relentless barking was not in her nature. Cathy's parents remained indoors while she grabbed a flashlight and stepped outdoors, into the woods. She strained her eyes in the dusky light of the evening. The shadows played tricks on the mind, the tree branches rattling overhead in the chilly breeze. Carefully, she walked toward the sound of the dogs. Every now and then, she would stop and strain her ears, or to try to catch whatever it was that was making them so anxious. There was no let-up from the dogs. They continued to bark in the shadows. They were clearly agitated by something. Then there was a scuffle, the sound of heavy feet on the ground, the breaking of branches, and one of the dogs let out a high-pitched yelp and shot past Cathy back towards the cabin. It appears that as Cathy rounded the side of the house, she was suddenly struck down. She didn't have time to react. She didn't have time to let out a cry. She was knocked to the ground with such power that the wind was knocked from her lungs. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but Cathy breathed her last breath that night. Moments later, her parents watched in bewilderment as the two dogs came scuttling into the cabin without Cathy. One of them was wounded. A large gash on one side was open and oozing blood. Immediately, the elderly couple rang the emergency services. It was 6:30 in the evening. They didn't know what was going on out in the darkness. Her father, Henry, was 88 and wheelchair-bound, and her mother, Virginia, was 84. There was little they could do, so they called out to their daughter while waiting for the police to show up. There was no reply. All was quiet in the woodland. It was as though Cathy had vanished into the night. From looking at the injury on the dog, they suspected it was a bear attack, but this would be incredibly unlikely, almost unheard of. Provincial officers from Fort Frances arrived by boat 30 minutes after they received the distress call. They immediately set out looking for Catherine. Her parents were worried sick. They knew that she must be injured somewhere near the cabin. The dogs knew what was out there. They had sensed the danger long before anyone else had. The officers conducted a full search of the area, looking under bushes and behind trees. looking for any sign of the missing woman. It took longer than they hoped due to the dense undergrowth, but then, 45 minutes later, their flashlights landed on something in front of them. The beam from the torch illuminated a small black bear. It must have been a yearling. It was staring straight at them, and it was straddling something, or someone. Upon closer inspection, officers realized it was Cathy. Her body lay lifeless beneath the bear, just 330 yards from the cabin. She had been severely mauled, and the bear appeared unafraid as the police approached. One of the officers raised a rifle and shot the bear. It fell to the ground, silent and still. As the shot rang out and echoed across the lake, they heard a low grumbling noise coming from the bushes, the clacking of teeth and the sound of heavy paws. They weren't alone. As they turned toward the sounds, their flashlights fell upon the outline of a large female black bear with another youngster. With the darkness distorting their surroundings, officers decided to leave the other two bears and carry Cathy's body away from the scene. It was too dangerous to try to deal with the other bears when they couldn't see properly and couldn't assess the situation fully in the darkness. They delivered the devastating news to Catherine's parents, who were waiting anxiously back in the cabin. Cathy had many friends and family who would miss her terribly. In her obituary, she was described as a feisty embracer of life who was passionate about gardening and who created a wonderful outdoor environment on our family farm. She left behind her husband, Phil, of 31 years, and their two children, Carter and Marty. It was a terribly sad incident that has puzzled wildlife officials and bear experts ever since. Black bears are notoriously timid when it comes to humans. 99 out of 100 encounters with them will see them turn and run the other way. They are much less aggressive than their grizzly cousins, and attacks by black bears are considered rare throughout the United States. In the past decade, there have only been 10 black bear attacks in the whole of the U.S., not a single one being in Minnesota. But when it comes to black bear attacks and dogs, there does seem to be a correlation. People who have been attacked have sometimes said that their dog spotted the bear first and incited the bear. This has encouraged it to run after the dog, and when it does so, the dog runs back to its owner, and that's when people can get caught in the middle. It seems that this time, Cathy was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Her dogs, who were likely acting protectively, may have encouraged the bears to attack by making them anxious, so that when Cathy arrived on the scene, they lashed out.